understanding type and characters, and to be more formal, glyphs. That's what we actually call these little things. Because we tend to see words in terms of the information they convey, we are rarely aware of the actual appearance of the individual letter. As designers, we must consider the letter forms not only as black marks on white paper, but as white space in and around the letters as well. In fact, we're going to start right now. Have you ever really looked at a letter? Notice the many intricate shapes in just one simple letter. Notice also the shapes outside the letter form. So your ability to see, to understand, and to appreciate these subtleties is of absolute importance. So let's examine printed letters more closely. Just about everything you read is Roman. It is the first type we learn and the most comfortable to read. There's also something called italic, which is slanted to the right and is used for emphasis. The alphabet, as you already know, has capital and small letters. In type terminology, we call the large letters caps, uppercase, or majestuals, and the small letters lowercase, or minuscules. These terms derive from the early days of printing when caps were kept in the upper case or drawer and the small letters in the case below. Most letter forms have certain things in common. X height. The X height refers to lowercase letters only. It is the height of the body or main element of the letter form and is equivalent to the height of the lowercase x, hence the name X height. The letter X is used because all terminals touch a line of measurement. You probably remember when we first learned how to write, and there was the line on top and the line on the bottom, and then the dashed line in the middle. Well, that dashed line in the middle was X height. You just didn't know it at the time. Ascender. The ascender is the part of the lowercase letter that rises above the body or above the X height of the letter. The descender is the part of a lowercase letter that falls below the body or below the X height of the letter. Counter. A counter refers to the enclosed space, the hollow part of the letter, basically the paper that you see on the other side of the letter. Serif is the stroke that projects from the top or bottom of the main stroke of the letter. Serifs originated with the Roman masons who terminated each stroke in a slab of stone with a serif to correct uneven appearance made by their tools. Some printed letters have no serifs at all. These letter forms are called sans serif. Now, sans serif, technically, in its italic form, it actually has a different name. And I can't remember what it is right this second, but I'll think of it at some point. Variations in type. Designing would be indeed limited if all typefaces had the same characteristics. One means, I just remembered, it's called obliquing. Okay, so an oblique is the italic version of a sans serif typeface. Okay, so one means of creating variety in typefaces is by varying the width and the weight of the letter form. Although 12 variations are shown on the slides that you're looking through, you'll notice that all are based on the following 4 versions of the regular typeface. So we have a light face, which is basically a light version of a regular typeface. Okay. Boldface, which is a heavy version of the regular typeface, which could also be called black. Medium is halfway between regular and bold. And thin is normally the word that they use when describing a thin-lined version of the typeface rather than calling it light face. Condensed. Condensed is a narrow version of a regular typeface, particularly desirable if it's important to get the most letters you can into a small space. Now, the condensed version, the way you can think of it is they're kind of squished together. Anyway, extended, a wide version of the regular typeface, also known as an expanded set. Okay, so extended just basically means those letters are fatter than they would normally be in the regular version. So font of type. Okay, so a font consists of all the characters, upper and lowercase, figures, fractions, reference marks, whatever, of one particular typeface, one particular size of typeface. Okay, so the Roman typeface is one font. The italic is another font. Fonts may vary in the number and variety of characters they contain. In addition to the alphabet and punctuation marks, some fonts include special characters such as mathematical symbols and foreign accents. Fonts may include some of the following. Let's say the ampersand, which is often used in place of the word and. Ligatures, two or more characters that are joined into a single unit, like FI. And so in some fonts, even two T's will use one letter form for all of it. Modern figures, which are also called lining figures. These are similar to caps in that they are uniform in height. So the normal letters that we're talking about numbers with this one. So modern figures, numbers are the ones we're most used to seeing. They sit on the baseline very, very comfortably. Now the baseline is what all letters sit on. And they don't ascend and they don't descend. They are the size of a capital letter of any one of the letters in that particular alphabet, generally about the size of the letter H. Old style figures. Now these are called non-lining figures, okay? Now these were designed to be more comfortable to read in body copy, okay? Now they're similar to lowercase characters in that they vary in size. Some go below the baseline, some sit on the baseline. They're just really designed to help your eye flow. But we're not used to seeing those kinds of characters anymore, and so they can be uncomfortable for us to use, but you've probably seen them in some of my handouts where they're small or they fall a little bit below the baseline. Okay, so small caps. Small caps are a complete alphabet of caps that are the same size as the X height of the lowercase characters. Okay, so we see these all the time, small caps, where, you know, the first letter, if you're trying to emphasize, is a normal size cap, and then the small caps are just little capital versions that are the X height. Okay. Typesetting methods. Okay, so there's a number of ways to set type, from the original method of setting type by hand, one character at a time, to computer-controlled photo typesetting, to modern-day computer typesetting. So we've discussed in the history of type before hand setting. Okay, so hand set type was introduced in the mid-15th century by Gutenberg. Okay. And until the late 19th century, it was the only means of setting type. Okay, so late 1800s, okay, it was still the only way to set type. You had to set it by hand, you had to set it by backwards, one letter at a time. Okay, in hand set type, every character, as well as the space between characters, is set on a separate piece of type. Notice that letters on the type are reversed so they will appear correct when printed. To set type, the compositor, okay, the compositor is the one who actually sets the type, or also called a typesetter, holds a composing stick in one hand and with the other hand selects the required pieces of type from the type case. When the job has been set, the type is locked up, and they really do lock it up. They cinch it down. Okay, with all the spacing that needs to be in there. Afterwards, the type is cleaned, and then each of those individual letters are redistributed back into their proper compartments for future use. Generally, this was the lowest person on the totem pole was the one who had to go through and put all these different typefaces back, because it wasn't just that they were different sizes or different letters. You also had different fonts. So you also had to know this is a Helvetica A and this is a Garamond A, and you don't want to get those mixed up. Okay. Although the compositor works quickly and instinctively, setting type by hand is relatively slow and is a very time-consuming process. Okay, by the late 19th century, so the late 1800s, machines had been developed that could cast type as individual characters, also called monotype, or entire lines, which were called linotypes. Whereas in handset type, the same characters are used and reused, and so they have to be stored. In machine set type, like linotype, the characters were cast as required, used, and then melted down to be reused again. To cast type, the typesetter sits at a keyboard very much like a typewriter. As the keys are struck, molds, which are called matrices, okay, matrices are the things that actually tell the letter A what it's supposed to look like. It's basically, you could call it a mold, okay, of the letters is filled with molten lead alloy that solidifies instantly to produce the type. Cast type did not totally replace handset type. They existed side by side, with a smaller text type being set by machine and larger display type set by hand. Casting type is faster and more efficient than setting type by hand and is therefore less expensive. The speed of setting is limited only by the keyboard operator's ability, approximating somewhere around 20 words per minute, although greater speed is possible on machines when operated by a teletype tape. Until the 1960s, casting was the most widely used method of type, and most of those casting machines still function just fine. So then they went to photo setting type, and then finally they arrived at computer set type. And now we're going to dive right into the key points to kind of take away from Chapter 2. And yep, here we go. So here we are. It's a big, bright, beautiful day, and we're on Chapter 2 in the type book, the yellow one. And we're just going to go ahead and go through what would have been a normal lecture, in addition to some of the ground laying work that we covered earlier in this lecture. Okay, so what a font used to mean, okay, and I covered this in the first part of this lecture. A font used to mean a single typeface in a particular size. So if you look right here in this image, you can see 14-point Century Schoolbook. That was one font. So there was an italic version of 14-point, and there was a bold version of 14-point Century Schoolbook, but it was one particular size. Okay, that's what a font used to mean. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other fonts and some of the different other things having to do with fonts. What we're looking at right now is something that used to be called a screen font or a bitmap font. Okay, it was designed specifically for dot matrix printers and because screens didn't understand anything but individual pixels, hence the name screen fonts. Okay, so we had these printers called dot matrix printers that the very good ones had 32 pins. Okay, so in each square inch, I think it was a square inch, it could slap that thing with 32 different pins, depending upon, how big a type you happen to be using. Okay, and so we had to have special fonts for that. And they weren't ever designed to be printed really in the grand scheme of things. They didn't look attractive. During this era, we were still very, very much using photo typeset type. Okay, But for the first periods, like in this particular image that you're looking at, this was in the very early of Mac. This is what we had to use on screen. And generally what they did to make it so you didn't accidentally select them is that they would give them city names. And so the term never use a city name to print with, that's where that particular term came from. Okay? And so that helps you understand it. Now here's an image of one of those wonderful dot matrix printers. Now these things still exist. They last a really, really long time. And it was the kind of printer we had before the laser technology came out. Okay? Most inkjets are true type printers. Okay? They're not dot matrix, they are true type printers. It means that basically what you see is what you get, and it can only do as good a quality as it's designed to do, whether it's 300 little dots per square inch or whether it's 1,200 dots per inch. That's all that printer can do, okay? It's a true type printer. Now, most true type printers actually, even though they say they can do things like 2,400 dots per inch or whatever, generally, even a photographer will tell you you're wasting a lot of your time if you go above about 350 dots per inch at 100% size, or pixels per inch at 100% size. Okay? So true type printers, that's basically what most inkjets are. Okay, this is an image setter. Okay, image setters were a whole different creature. What happened is Adobe came out with this wonderful language called PostScript. Okay, it's their invention. And there's level 1 PostScript, and there's level 2 PostScript, and there's level 3 PostScript. This is an image setter. And image setters were everything from level 1 to level 2 to level 3. And basically, it's kind of like a giant laser printer, except all it does is black and white, but it can do a true 2,400 dots per inch because it uses a photographic process to make things happen. So it's the quality that a photograph can make. Okay? So where are fonts located? Now, I'm more of an expert with the Macintosh, but you can see that fonts are hidden deep inside the system. Okay, that's where they reside. Okay, so let's go through the different kinds of fonts specifically. Okay, so a PostScript or Type 1 font, they use those terms interchangeably, but that's exactly what they are. They are a completely outlined shape that can be as big as you want it to be or as small as you want it to be. It is a vector character, just like in Illustrator when you make a vector object. You can make that as big as you want. You can make it the size of a building if you have something that can print it. And the quality will be absolutely perfect because it uses Bezier curves, which is all PostScript stuff. Okay, so a Type 1 and PostScript font are outline fonts. It is a shape. In a PostScript Type 1 font, there are 256 characters, and generally there's two pieces. There is a screen font and then there is a printer font. Okay, and so what it will normally do is show you the screen version when you're working, and then when it actually goes to the printer, it sends the PostScript font off to the printer as long as it is a PostScript printer. And again, not all printers are PostScript printers. You can see the little PostScript logo in the bottom right hand corner of the slide. You'll also have to understand that PostScript or Type 1 fonts are platform specific. So if you've expended a tremendous amount of money to get the PostScript version of the entire Helvetica family, that's great, but you only own the Macintosh version or you own the Windows version. That's it. You don't own both of them. They are separate, okay? So they are platform specific. Okay, now TrueType fonts. This is showing you a Windows and a Macintosh window showing some of the TrueType fonts. Okay, TrueType was basically an invention of several different companies. Well, it was Apple and Windows, because they were tired of paying Adobe for the term PostScript. And they also wanted something that would appear better on screen. And so together they invented this concept called TrueType fonts. And if you look at the Windows part there where it says document properties, the thing in front of Helvetica, okay, that's a PostScript type 1 symbol. And then the little TT, that is TrueType. Now, TrueType fonts can have 256 characters. It's one piece, though. There's not a separate font for the printer and the screen. It is one thing for all of it, okay? Now, TrueType fonts were supposed to be cross-platform, so you were supposed to be able to take them back and forth between Windows and Mac. That was in a perfect world. Don't assume that that will hold true. Okay, now TrueType fonts are outline fonts, but they aren't as good a quality as the PostScript fonts, especially when sending to a PostScript printer. Okay, so you can tell that there were some serious issues. One was cross-platform compatibility, and they wanted something that was as good as PostScript fonts. So they invented this wonderful thing called OpenType, okay? And you actually even have special windows inside of several of your applications about whether OpenType is on or off, okay? Now, OpenType is basically the best of PostScript and the best of TrueType all slammed into one font. But that's not the greatest thing about it. The greatest thing is, you noticed all those other fonts were 256 glyphs or characters. Well, the the OpenType font can be upwards of 64,000 characters, okay? Which was really, really kind of cool, because if you're talking about kanji, which is a Japanese letter form, you have a different letter for every single word. So 256 characters was not even close to enough to be able to print and use fonts effectively for Japanese. But now that you have 64,000 characters, now you've got something to work with as far as a font's concerned. And it was completely cross-platform compatible. Okay, it had the advantage of TrueType, meaning that it was one piece. We did not have a separate print font for the printer and a separate font for the screen. It all worked great. And it was an outline font. Okay, so it had all of these wonderful things together. Plus, since you had 64,000 characters, you could have all sorts of other metrics built into it, which was great, because then you could get more into, well, if it's the letter E and it's next to the letter V, how far away does it need to be? And I can go ahead and make those adjustments and build that into the font. All of that stuff you couldn't really do with a 256 character font set. But with 64,000, I can have 18 different versions of the letter A if I want to. So it's really, really handy. Okay, so, and here's another slide showing you OpenType. So look at all the different versions of the letter F, and even separate ones for when the F and the A are next to each other, or if you have two capital Fs. Don't know why you would do that, but you could. And then look at all the different H's with all these wonderful swashes. Okay, OpenType is what made all of that possible. All right, so maybe you're like me and you have a gazillion fonts on your computer. It's really critical, if you have a lot of fonts, to be able to manage those fonts, okay? Because Every application that is active on a computer is looking at all of your fonts. Okay, so you can imagine that takes up a lot of system resources and can really, really slow you down. So if you open up Microsoft Word and you have to wait for 16,000 fonts to load, that's going to slow down the whole process. So font management utility allows you to activate or deactivate fonts depending upon what you need and what you don't need, which is kind of nice. So Suitcase is one of the main font utilities. Font Agent Pro, this was another one. I believe that one is only Macintosh compatible. Font Explorer, okay, the font management utility right there. You can see there's some TrueType fonts. Even though you see the letter A on the left-hand side, it's still a TrueType font. It's clearly labeled. And there's some OpenType fonts. Clearly, this person doesn't seem to have any true Adobe PostScript fonts. And a lot of Windows machines never ever dealt with PostScript fonts. And that's why the Mac was such a popular platform and still is a popular platform for the print industry. It was all because of PostScript. Okay. All right, so this is the end of the slides. Okay, but I want to remind you of something that we do have on the Macintosh. Okay. Okay, so on the Macintosh, I'm going to close down the slide presentation there, and you guys don't need to look at my email. On the Mac, we have the font book. This is the built-in utility. It is not ideal, but it tries to meet most of those needs. This is what opens up when you load a font. When you double-click on it, when you have a brand new font and you double-click on it, it will open up Font Book. But it allows you to turn off and on fonts at any point or add new libraries. Okay, like here's my modern type library. Okay, you can disable it or you can add fonts to it. Okay, or you can delete it. It's kind of like a playlist for fonts, but you don't want all of your music to be loaded at the same time. So it allows you to manage that. Now, I don't know what the equivalent would be in the Windows, but I don't think there actually is an equivalent on the Windows. All right, so I hope that has taken some of the mystery of fonts and maybe a little bit about the makeup, the basic makeup of characters. You guys have a great day.